It is my honor to introduce Professor Upinder Singh. Professor Singh has been a professor of history for many, many years, beginning with the St. Stephen's College, later Delhi University, and she's now at the Ashoka University. She has been a recipient of the Netherlands Government Reciprocal Fellowship, the Ancient India and Iran Trust, the Wallace India Visiting Fellowship, the Daniel Ingalls Fellowship at the Harvard Yenching Institute, and the Erasmus Mundus Fellowship as well. She was awarded the Infosys Award for Social Sciences in History in 2009. Professor Singh's interests range over various aspects of ancient Indian history and archaeology, political ideas and practice, and India's interactions with the wider world. She is the author of many books, and her research papers have been published in Indian and international journals. She is the author of Kings, Brahmans, and Temples in Odisha, an epigraphic study, Ancient Delhi, The Discovery of Ancient India, Early Archaeologists and the Beginnings of Archaeology, The Idea of Ancient India, Essays on Religion, Politics, and Archaeology, Political Violence in Ancient India, and Ancient India, Culture of Contradictions. She has edited Delhi, Ancient History, Rethinking Early Medieval India, and has co-edited Ancient India New Research, Asian Encounters Exploring Connected Histories, Buddhism in Asia, Revival and Reinvention, The World of India's First Archaeologist, Letters from Alexander Cunningham to J.D.M. Begler. Needless to say, she is one of the most read professors of history, and it was really wonderful to see so many students here talking to her just before the lecture, and I think we can't wait to have you on board to speak. Professor Singh.
Trustees of the museum, Mr. Mukherjee, Mrs. Kshirsagar, and other members of the Kshirsagar family, curators and staff of the museum, teachers, students, and friends. I would like to thank the Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Vastu Sangrahalaya for inviting me to deliver the first Eknath Kshirsagar Memorial Lecture. I know how closely Mr. Kshirsagar was associated with the museum and with the cultural life of Mumbai, so it is a real honor. Ancient India was undoubtedly a center from where myriad influences radiated to other parts of the world. These influences were often transformed, sometimes beyond recognition, in the process of transmission. It was also a center of cultural confluence. A great deal has been said about the Persian and Hellenistic influences on India. But I want to look beyond them to the role of nomadic people from Central Asia. Among many groups of warriors who made their way into the subcontinent as invaders between the end of the Maurya Empire and the establishment of the Gupta Empire, much has been written and said about the Indo-Greeks and the Kushans. I want to talk about the Scythians. I do not want to tell you a simple story of Scythian influence on India. I do want to emphasize that the history of ancient India was closely intertwined with what was happening in other parts of the world, and that over the centuries, Central Asia has played a central role in Indian history. The Scythians were a conglomerate of nomadic people who roamed across the vast Eurasian steppe, stretching from the great Hungarian plain to Manchuria. They captured the attention and imagination of many in the ancient world. In Herodotus's histories, they feature as fierce, hard-drinking warriors with an unusual lifestyle. Herodotus has many things to say about the Scythians. This is one of them. Quote, "The Scythians were more clever than any other people in making the most important discovery we know of concerning human affairs, though I do not admire them in other respects. They have discovered how to prevent any attacker from escaping them and how to make it impossible for anyone to overtake them against their will. For instead of establishing towns or walls, they are all mounted archers who carry their homes along with them and derive their sustenance not from cultivated fields, but from their herds. Since they make their homes on carts, how could they not be invincible or impossible even to engage in battle? In Achaemenid reliefs and inscriptions, this is in ancient Iran, the Scythians appear as rebels and as subject people. And you can see them here, the men with the pointed hats, bearing tribute to the Achaemenid emperor. Although the Scythians themselves produced no surviving texts, they did leave archaeological traces, especially in the form of massive kurgan burials. Kurgan simply means mound. And these burials have been found at many sites. There were variations across time and space in Scythian cultural traditions, but there were also continuities. For instance, in their association with monumental elite burials, skilled bowmanship on horseback, and animal art. The many kurgan sites include Issyk in Kazakhstan, and this is the famous golden man of Issyk, who's a kind of national emblem in Kazakhstan, and you can see some of the gold that was found in this ancient Scythian burial. You'll see that the Scythians were very fond of gold. So this is the golden man of Issyk in Kazakhstan, and the beautiful image that you saw on the poster for this talk is from the site of Tilyatip in Afghanistan, where 6 burials and over 2,000 gold artifacts and fabulous riches of various kinds were found. Nomads, like the Scythians, were once seen as unruly disruptors or passive receptors rather than as purveyors of significant cultural traditions. But perspectives have changed. Over the past few decades, scholars have emphasized the role played by nomads in Eurasian history and the close relationship between nomads, states, and empires. However, these interventions have made, unfortunately, little impact on writings on ancient India. The consolidation of the Chinese Qin Empire in the 3rd century BCE and the subsequent militarist policies followed by the Han dynasty triggered a series of tribal movements in Central Asia that had major impact on Indian history. The Scythians, displaced by the Yuezhi and Wusun tribes, crossed the Hindu Kush into northwestern India sometime in the 1st century BCE. They displaced the Indo-Greeks in Gandhar and eventually moved further into the interiors of the subcontinent. In Indian sources, they are known as Shakas. The 3 main centers of Indo-Scythian or Shaka rule, known mainly through coins and inscriptions, were Gandhar in the northwest, the Mathura area, and the Gujarat and Maharashtra areas in the west. So where we are today, many centuries ago, was very much Scythian, Indo-Scythian or Shaka country. Governors known as Kshatrapas or Mahakshatrapas played an important role in their political expansion and ultimately became independent. Although the Shaka era of 78 CE is still used in India, and by the way, the general view is that it is associated with the Western Kshatrapa ruler Chashtan. So although the Shaka era is still used in India, these people do not usually attract much attention in our country among historians. Indian historians have usually understood the Shakas in 2 ways. The first, as a foreign group who was rapidly Indianized and assimilated into the Indian social fabric. On the other hand, the Shaka invasions, along with those of the Bactrian Greeks, Parthians and Kushans, are said to have created a perception of social crisis among the Brahmin intelligentsia, reflected in disparaging statements about mlechas or barbarians and their rule in ancient texts. The long duration of Shaka rule in parts of northern and western India, stretching in different regions from about the 1st century BCE to the 4th century CE, and the fact that the specter of Shakas loomed large in Indian sources long thereafter suggests that the Shaka shock to the Indian cultural fabric may have been greater than usually imagined. The problem I would like to present in today's talk is as following. Histories of the Scythians of the Eurasian steppes usually stop short once they cross the Hindu Kush. Histories of the Scythians in the Indian subcontinent ignore their steppe background. There is a need to reassess the Indo-Scythian or Shaka impact in the Indian subcontinent, taking into account the archaeological evidence and their long history in the steppes. The central questions posed in my paper, in my lecture rather, are, apart from their inscriptions and coins, what and where are the material markers of Indo-Scythian or Shaka rule in the subcontinent? Given the distinctive Scythian cultural practices in the Eurasian steppes, it seems strange that the kurgan burials, gold artifacts, and animal art that are distinctive to their identity and presence over the centuries do not seem to be found south of Gandhar. Have the Scythian material markers disappeared due to the hot and humid climate of India? Did they simply lose all that was distinctive in their cultural practices as they became rapidly sedentized and Indianized? Or have we not looked carefully enough? This lecture identifies a few material markers of the Shakas in Indian archaeology and art against their Central Asian background. The specific focus is on Indo-Scythian levels at Takshila and Sonk, Scythian figures and Scythian elements in Indian art, and the role of the Indo-Scythians or Shakas in the evolution of classical Indian royal ideology. Let us start with the Northwest. Map seems to be missing. I will not bore you with the details of political history, but I will show you some Indo-Scythian coins from this area. This is a coin of Maui's, and you can see on the obverse there is an elephant, and you will see on the reverse a symbol called the caduceus with Greek legend Basilios Mau, and there is a monogram also. This is a copper coin of Asilysis. On the obverse, the Greek legend Basilion Megalou Azilisou, and on the reverse there is Heracles, that is Hercules, with the Prakrit Kharoshthi legend Maharajasa Mahatasa Ayilishasa. So the Indo-Scythians continued the Indo-Greek practice of having biscript and bilingual coins. This is a silver coin of Azes II. On the obverse, you see the king with the Greek legend Basilion Megalou Azou, and on the reverse, the Greek goddess Athena and the legend Rajarajasa Mahatasa Ayasa. And finally, a coin of Asilysis, again the king, the Greek legend, and then on the reverse, and this is really interesting, Gajalakshmi, and the goddess Lakshmi standing on lotus flanked by elephants, and you have a Prakrit legend. But what I want to look at, having, I hope, whetted your appetite, is the evidence from Takshila. There's the map. This is in present-day Rawalpindi district in Pakistan. John Marshall's 1913 to 34 excavations at Takshila identified 3 mounds, Bhir Mound, Sirkap, and Sirsuk. And the mound that we are going to talk about, going to look at, is Sirkap. And Marshall's excavations identified 5 strata at this mound. The Kushan, then there was period 2 and 3, Parthian and later Shaka, 4, period 4, early Shaka, and you can see the stratigraphy of the site according to John Marshall's excavations. And what I want to focus on are strata 4 and 3, okay, which are in maroon because we are going to talk about the Shakas. And we also can include some of the material found in stratum 2 because at some point around 20 or 30 CE, there was an earthquake in the Takshila area, and there, a lot of the material belonging to different levels got mixed up. The city was rebuilt after that, and so it was difficult for Marshall to distinguish between the antiquities found in these strata. Marshall's description of the Shaka Parthian city plan, and since I have mentioned the Parthians, I should say something about them. I think we think about the Parthians even less than we think about the Shakas. The Parthians were originally, we can trace their origins to the Parni tribe that lived in the area around the Aral Sea. And this nomadic tribe moved into the area of Parthia, which corresponds roughly to the Khurasan region of Iran. And after being based there, they proceeded to carve out, to create a massive multicultural, multi-ethnic empire, and they reached the northwestern tip of the Indian subcontinent as well. So at the site of Takshila, Marshall talked about the features of the Shaka and Parthian phases together because there were a lot of similarities. Now, during this period, when the city was inhabited by these Indo-Scythians and Indo-Parthians, according to Marshall, some of the older Greek city plan stayed on, but there were also some changes. And he commented on the fact that there were a large number of religious buildings, mostly Buddhist, in the city, and observed that the artifacts showed a mixture of Greek, West Asian, and Indian elements. Although scholarly literature tends to emphasize the Hellenistic aspects of Takshila, we actually know most about the Indo-Scythian and Indo-Parthian phases, which are extremely important parts of the city's history. Political history and material culture have different rhythms and cultural continuities across periods of dynastic change are to be expected in archaeology. However, several new types of artifacts appeared in Sirkap in the Shaka Parthian strata. So let me give you a few examples of the changes. Okay, the gold is always the most fabulous, but there were many new pottery types as well. There was a change in the form of terracotta tanks. There were the addition of female figures on these terracotta tanks, which were used in rituals. Stamps for stamping pottery and textiles were found. Lots of beads. These people seem to have been very fond of beads, of glass, of shell, all kinds of other materials, faience, steatite, semi-precious stone, such as carnelian and agate. And of course, what attracts maximum attention often is lots of fine, heavy gold ornaments, some encrusted with semi-precious stones. And these were found, many of these were found buried under house floors, and some of them gave evidence of granulation and filigree work known in the West. So you can look at some of the fabulous specimens of gold jewelry, which these are from the National Museum in New Delhi. There was an exhibition recently, and they came out of the vaults, and you were able to feast our eyes on them. Apart from these fabulous ornaments, there were all sorts of other small but very significant artifacts that were found at Shaka and Shaka Parthian levels. So lots of silverware. This one that you see has an inscription on it, a Kharoshti inscription. Then seals and ceilings, keys, this is interesting, keys made of copper, bronze, and iron, certain copper objects that may have functioned as surgical implements. Also introduced in the Shaka Parthian phase were buckles and clasps made of copper. And other artifacts include, for instance, what you see here, this figure of Harpocrates, a deity who is Egyptian in origin but was adopted in the Greco-Roman world. Among the very striking artifacts found at Sirkap, at Shaka Parthian levels, were these ornamental stone artifacts called toilet trays. And they're described in Marshall's report, and almost all of them, 33 of them were found. And these are trays that are usually 11 to 12 centimeters in diameter, and they're made of various kinds of stone. Some of them show men with pointed hats. So now I will talk a lot about men with pointed hats. This is where you will encounter them first. And these men in pointed hats in art historical literature are known as, routinely, for the sake of convenience, as Scythian figures. As far as these toilet trays are concerned, it has been suggested that some of the scenes, especially those displaying marine monsters, sometimes with male or female riders, may be connected with royal Scythian mythology. Remember, the Scythians did not produce texts. So what we know about them, their religious beliefs and their mythologies are from other sources, and often the sources of their enemies, for instance, the Greeks. And of course, there is this material evidence, which is very important. These sorts of trays may have been associated with rituals involving much wine drinking because they were known to be copious drinkers. The Shaka Parthian strata at Sirkap yielded a large number of iron weapons of various types. And just this morning I was in the museum and I was looking at the arms and ammunitions gallery, and I visited various other arms and ammunitions galleries in museums. And I often wonder why the galleries start with the Rajputs and the Delhi Sultans and the Mughals, because weapons have been an important part of Indian history from much, much earlier. I guess it's just that the weaponry from earlier centuries is not as striking and as impressive as what you see in the medieval period. But in the Shaka Parthian levels at Sirkap, there were all kinds of iron weapons of various types, all kinds of different types of swords, daggers, different kinds of javelins. I won't give you all the details, but we do have a detailed inventory in John Marshall's Takshila report. Various types of spearheads, new types of spearheads. And I really feel that in archaeology, we need to pay more attention to the archaeology of weaponry, because certain people are associated with specific types of weapons. So for instance, at Sirkap, we see conical arrowheads and 3-bladed arrowheads make their appearance in the Shaka Parthian phase. We also get 18 highly corroded body armor plates and links of an iron chain. These are in the Takshila Museum. And some of the armor plates seem to be for human body armor. Marshall suggested that some might have been meant for horses. And apart from the remains of body armor, there were also iron horse trappings, snaffle bits joined in the middle with cheek rings, various kinds of cheek bars of horse bridles. Remember, these were warriors whose military prowess was based on cavalry, and it was based on heavy cavalry. So this is to be expected, that you should find a lot of horse trappings at levels associated with them. Among the Sirkap structural remains is the stupa of the double-headed eagle, that was found in one of the structures here. Marshall suggested that the motif of the double-headed eagle was a very old and widespread one and was introduced into Takshila by the Scythians. At Jolian, in a monastic complex, there was a chapel which had clay relief scenes, including a Buddha or a Bodhisattva, flanked by two figures who, from their pointed hats and attire, seemed to be Shakas, perhaps a donor and his son or attendant. Thus, while there is cultural continuity across the various occupational strata, the advent of the Shakas and Parthians at Sirkap in Takshila was also marked by several distinctive changes in artifact types, in armor and weaponry and ritual objects. Most of these changes cannot be explained as reflecting Hellenistic influence, of which the Shakas are supposed to have been passive consumers and purveyors. Let us swing from Takshila in the northwest to Mathura, and I want to say a little bit about the Shaka Kshatrapa rulers of the Mathura areas. Again, no political history, just some images. This is a coin of Rajuvula, an unclear Greek legend on the obverse with the portrait of the king, and on the reverse, Athena and a Kharoshti legend, Chhatrapasa Pratihata Chakrasya Rajuvulasa. This is another coin. Remember, these are the kings who were ruling in the Mathura area from around the 1st century BCE to the early century CE. This is a coin of Rajuvula, a lion on the obverse, and on the reverse you have Hercules. This is one of the most intriguing artifacts of the Shaka Kshatrapa period. It is in the British Museum. It is known as the Mathura Lion Capital. It was originally a capital which seems to have been turned into a reliquary for holding sacred Buddhist relics. And it is incised all over by inscriptions of the Kshatrapa period in the 1st century CE in the Kharoshti script. So I've never seen, I think it's a unique artifact. You don't have a lion capital inscribed all over the surface, all around, with inscriptions of different sizes, perhaps of different hands. A very intriguing artifact. But I want to talk about Mathura, and I want to talk about the site of Sonk near Mathura, because this was an excavated site like Takshila. So what was found can be assigned a certain chronology, certain rough dates. A profusion of inscriptions and sculptures of Shaka Kshatrapa times have been found in the Mathura area, and the site of Sonk, about 22 kilometers southwest of Mathura, was excavated in 1966 to 74 under the direction of Herbert Hartel. 8 periods of occupation were identified, and period 4 was assigned to the time of the Kshatrapas and a local ruler named Ramadatta, and dated from the end of the 1st century BCE to the early 1st century CE. So let's get a sense of what was found in period 4 levels. There was a spurt in building activities, new kinds of structures were made, many coins were found, seals and seal impressions were discovered. Pottery is very important in archaeology. I mean, it's really an important basis for identifying different phases of human activity. So new pottery types in the Shaka Indo-Scythian phase included new types of storage jars with short neck and beaded, sometimes undercut rim. There were globular water jars, ewers with corrugated necks or rims, and the foreign pottery shapes included the following. 2 of them you can see over here on the left, and certain similarities have been drawn, have been shown, have been suggested with Central Asian and Bactrian pottery types: the capstan-shaped cup with sagar base and a beaker with a bulging wall and grooved vertical rim. So there are certain changes in pottery types that we see, and some pottery types seem to have similarities with Central Asian and Afghanistan pottery. A new kind of mother goddess figure. I'm using the word mother goddess in quotes because we don't know whether these were associated with any kind of maternal aspects or not. Whether they were goddesses can also be, we can ask questions. But a new type appears at Kshatrapa levels. And you see these female figurines with these figures which are larger than before, with punctured eyes, which gives them a rather piercing look. There are also various votive tanks used for rituals, and sometimes they have female figures seated around them. Sometimes these female figures are holding children and bowls. So these appear in the Shaka Kshatrapa levels. Lots of beads made of various kinds of materials. In contrast to Takshila, hardly any gold or silver objects were found in period 4 at Sonk. Expectedly, many iron weapons were found, including various kinds of arrowheads, various kinds of knives and daggers, and some of the iron objects seem to be horse bits and part of horse gear. Thus, at Sonk, as at Takshila, the Indo-Scythian levels are marked by new types of artifacts, including pottery, ritual objects, I'm talking about those terracotta tanks, and these female figurines, and new types of weapons. So something was happening. The second part of what I want to talk about has to do with the so-called Scythian figures and possible Scythian elements in Indian art. And this is a silver coin of Azes II, an Indo-Scythian king. On the obverse, you see the bust of the king, or the king, not the bust, you see the king on horseback, and he is, there's the Greek, the title Basilion, Megalou, and on the reverse there is the Greek god Zeus and the legend Maharajasa, Rajarajasa, Megalou, Ayasa. So again, you have the use of Greek and Prakrit Kharoshthi. On coins, figures of Indo-Scythian rulers can be identified by their names, their distinctive cataphractus armor, and horse mount. The situation is a bit more complex in the case of the so-called Scythian figures that are mentioned in discussions of stone and terracotta art. Of course, there's some ambiguity when we use the term Scythian figures. It's not always clear that what is being the kind of the ethnic affiliation of the person who is being depicted. Is it Shaka? Is it Kushan? Is it Parthian? So there's a looseness in terminology, but there are a lot of figures. I discovered this because I started on a mad hunt for men in pointed hats, and I found there's so many of them all over the country, and they are not discussed much in art historical literature because they're artistically unremarkable, but they're so numerous, and I think they're suggesting something significant. A head count of men with pointed caps in Indian art would reveal that Scythian figures, although artistically unremarkable, are quite numerous at several sites across India. And you see them here, these heads, terracotta and stone heads found in the Mathura area. You find these men in pointed hats, and you can see their attire, their Central Asian attire, which is quite different from the Indian attire that you find at the same sites. You find them in stone reliefs in the Mathura area. It's not only Mathura. Kaushambi also, this is in the Kaushambi district of Uttar Pradesh, Ahit has also yielded these so-called Scythian figures. To me, what was most interesting was the fact that at some of these sites, these so-called Scythian figures are associated with what are known in archaeological literature as terracotta tanks. These are small tanks which seem to have been used in household rituals. And what you see here are examples of artifacts found at various sites where, rather surprisingly, you find men with pointed hats seated around the rim of the terracotta tanks. And surprisingly, even more surprisingly, they are associated with musical instruments. So, this kind of association, these connections that these figures have with music is something that I find quite intriguing. And you find this at Ahichatra, you find it at other places. I've seen in the Bihar Museum also, there are figures, terracotta tanks, where you have men with pointed hats playing musical instruments. Men with pointed hats appear conspicuously in a relief carved on the upper panel of the west pillar of the northern gateway of Stupa 1 at Sanchi in Raisen district in Madhya Pradesh. It is a joyous celebratory scene with figures arranged around a stupa. In the upper register, kinnaras extend garlands towards the stupa and men offer obeisance, holding garlands and offerings. Further below are 2 rows of men bearing offerings, playing musical instruments, some moving in a rhythmic dancing step. Among the musicians in the lowest row, the 2 on the left, please look at these figures, the 2 on the left play a curved carnix, that is the Celtic horn, ending in a snake's head. The third wears a conical hat and plays a double flute. The other 4 men in this row play 2 different kinds of drums, possibly a tambourine and a stringed instrument. In the second row from below, I'm talking about this row now. In the second row from below, you have other kinds of, you can see the other activities. There are men holding garlands, performing obeisance, and again, there are men who are playing some kind of instruments and moving around in a rhythmic dancing steps. The treatment of the hair and headgear varies. You see curly hair, fillets with tassels, and pointed hats. And some of these men look bearded, but all the men in the relief wear similar attire. They wear a tunic and in some cases, additionally, a cloak. The footwear, where visible, consists of boots or sandals with crisscrossed leather straps. Alfred Frouchet interpreted this relief as a scene depicting the celebration of the enshrinement of the Buddha's relics in a stupa by the Mallas of Kushinara. According to him, the attire of the musicians shows what the sculptors of central India thought the Mallas, people of the north, looked like. Did foreign people serve as stand-ins for Mallas, who must have been considered very much Indian? Or does this scene advertise the Buddha's following among foreign folk? As for the foreign musical instruments, the carnix is found in various European, including Greco-Roman contexts. The double flute, which our man with the pointed hat is playing, is a typically Greek instrument, the aulos. The homogenization of attire and footwear, the fact that the man in the lowest row wearing the Scythian hat plays a double flute, suggests a conflation of features in conceptualization, whether of foreigners as foreigners or foreigners as northerners. It's also around the same time that we see soldiers or guards in Scythian attire at several sites. And the representations belong roughly to the period between 100 BCE and 300 CE. And you see these figures on several Amravati and Nagarjun Konda panels, on a vihara lintel at Mathura, and even on a medallion at Bodh Gaya. At Nagarjun Konda in the Guntur district of Andhra Pradesh, there are a guard or soldier and a cup bearer. Both wear a conical cap or a helmet, a heavy tunic, and trousers. And the guard or the soldier carries a long spear. The increasing representations of horses in sculptures of this period, sometimes fitted with elaborate ornaments and trappings, can be interpreted as a response to the influx of waves of cavalry-based invaders into India, among whom the Shakas were one. The elaborately caparisoned horses in sculptures at Sanchi and Amaravati are a sign of the changed times. Especially interesting is the fact that at sites such as Amaravati and Nagarjun Konda, in certain depictions of the great departure, that's when Siddhartha sneaks out in the dead of night, leaving the palace. In certain depictions of the great departure from Kapilavastu, the groom leading Siddhartha's horse wears rather un-Indian attire and a pointed hat. Rosenfield suggests that the many images of this kind found in 3rd century contexts in Andhra suggest that the Indo-Scythians may have found employment as mercenaries and guards as their fortunes declined in North India. The ubiquity of various types of Scythian figures in Indian art may reflect a recognition of Scythian or Kushan or Central Asian elites as distinctly different cultural types, as well as their absorption into Indian art in different contexts. Animal art is an important aspect of Scythian culture in the Eurasian steppes. The ornamentation on a bangle and girdle or necklace found at a site called Patan in Kohistan in Punjab shows similarities with the animal art of the Eurasian steppes. It is possible, I'm throwing out this suggestion, it is for the art historians to follow it up. It is possible that some of the fantastic and coiled animals that become ubiquitous at many early historic sites in various parts of the subcontinent from the 1st century BCE onwards may be inspired by Scythian or, more broadly speaking, Central Asian traditions. These include reliefs of fantastic animals found on the gateway of a Naga temple at Sonk. Okay, that's what you see there. And also at Bharhut and Sanchi in central India. And Buddhist sites in the Western Ghats are replete with these fantastic animals. I think there is something significant here that art historians need to investigate further. Figures with distinctive caps and attire, often associated with horses, also appear later at Ajanta and can be identified as Scythians, generic Central Asians, or as surrogates for Northerners. In Cave 16 at Ajanta, they appear in the story of Nanda, set in Kapilavastu, as well as part of the cityscape, tending to and riding horses. In Ajanta Cave 1, they appear in the story of Mahasudassana, which is set in Kushavati, that is in Kushinagara, in the main scene as well as in the scene flanking it to the right, where they appear with horses. The ceiling of Cave 1 bears 3 surviving paintings of Kubera in a conical cap and a long-sleeved coat. In 2 paintings, he has similarly dressed companions. Osman Boparachi identifies Iranian elements in the depiction of Kuber holding a wine cup on the basis of the attire and the fluttering ribbon streaming from his head. On the other hand, I do feel that maybe it's not necessary that we're looking at very specific ethnic types. It could be a kind of merging, a mingling of different kinds of elements associated with Central Asians that are being depicted here in the paintings at Ajanta. The Ajanta paintings indicate that a certain idea of the North and Northerners had been incorporated into the Buddha's life story. It is possible that this may have been based on, and I'm throwing this idea out, I'm not it's just an interesting thought, possible that this idea may have been based on a conflation between the Shakas and the Shakyas due to the similarity in their names. But even if these are imaginative renderings of the North, they were based on the historical reality of several centuries of Shaka or Central Asian presence and rule in India. Further, it is more than likely, as I just said, that rather than specific ethnic groups, we are looking at artistic imaginings of composite or generic Central Asian types. The last 5 minutes or a little more, I want to just say something about the Indo-Scythian role in the evolution of Indian royal ideology and royal religious policy. What you see is a sculptural relief from the site of Kanganahalli in Gulbarga district in Karnataka. And there is an inscription which translates as, it's Raya Pulumavi Ajayatasa Ujjaini Deti. That is, King Pulumavi gives Ujjaini to Ajayata. And Oscar von Hinnuber has suggested that this seems to be a visual record of a political event. The Satvahan king Vasishti Putra Pulumavi handing over the city of Ujjaini to his Shaka Kshatrapa rival Chashtan, and that this political setback was represented in this relief as an act of magnanimity. So now we are moving closer to home, to Gujarat and Maharashtra. What was happening here during the period 200 BCE to 300 CE, we see very significant developments in royal religious ideology and religious process that were evolving through a continuous dialogic interdynastic process. Western India, where the Shaka Kshatrapas and Satvahans were locked in a bitter conflict for control over the western seaports, was an important locus of developments. In about the third quarter of the 1st century CE, the army of Nahapan, the Shaka Kshatrapa ruler of the Kshaharat line, under the command of his son-in-law, Ushavadat, moved southwards, engaged the Satvahan army in fierce combat, and established control over the coastal and inland regions of western India. Ushavadat had Kshatrapa power boldly inscribed in the Buddhist caves at Nashik by commissioning the construction of the large, elaborately ornamented cave 10. And the cave has several inscriptions. I just want to direct your attention to one of these inscriptions of Ushavadat, who was the son-in-law of the Shaka Kshatrapa, Nahapan. What does it say? It records the excavation of the cave and cisterns and gift of a field for monks. And what is significant for my argument today is the eulogy of Ushavadat. He is described as an extraordinarily generous patron of Brahmins. He is said to have given 16 villages to the gods and Brahmins, caused 100,000 Brahmins to be fed the whole year round. He is said to have given 8 wives to Brahmins at the Tirth of Prabhasa, so on and so forth. What does it all add up to? If you don't look at the details, but the larger kind of process that is reflected in this sort of inscription, by ostentatiously advertising generosity towards Brahmins and highlighting elements of the Puranic Purta Dharma, such as Tirtha, pilgrimage, Dana, ritual giving, and charitable acts, the Shaka Kshatrapas, I argue, made a significant impact on the evolution of ancient Indian political ideology. And it doesn't end here, and this is the last specific example I want to give. This is the replica of the Girnar or Junagadh rock, which is there in the National Museum. It's a remarkable rock. It has inscriptions of Ashok, an inscription of the Shaka Kshatrapa Rudradaman, which happens to be the oldest long inscription in literary Sanskrit prose, and an inscription of Skandagupta. This is a very important inscription in more ways than one. It begins with the eulogy not of a king, but of a lake called Sudarshana, literally beautiful to look at. And it goes on to give us the history. I'm talking about the inscription in the middle, that is in maroon, the inscription of Rudradaman. It gives us the history of the Sudarshan lake. It tells us that this artificial water reservoir was begun by the Vaishya Pushyagupta, who was the provincial governor during the time of the Mauryan king Chandragupta. And the inscription tells us that this Sudarshan lake was completed under the supervision of Yavana Tushaspa during the time of Ashok. And then it goes on to describe a terrible storm that took place, which tore a huge breach into the reservoir, leading it to dry up. And then it tells us that against the express advice of his counselors, who considered it an impossible task, Rudradaman initiated a massive repair operation, that is, to repair the Sudarshan lake. The work was entrusted to and successfully completed by the Pahlava Suvishakha, who seems to have been some sort of governor. So you get all these foreign-sounding names, the Yavana Tushaspa, you have the Pahlava Suvishakha. And what we are interested in particular, for today's discussion, is the description of Rudradaman, the Shaka Kshatrapa Rudradaman. And of course, it praises his martial prowess. All great kings are expected to be great warriors. But Rudradaman's great fame rested not only on his military victories, but also on a long list of stellar qualities and achievements. To the elements in the model of the ideal king already present in ancient Indian royal prashastis, Rudradaman's inscription adds skill in music, non-violence, and compassion. And this is a translation of a bit of from the inscription. From the womb, he was distinguished by the possession of undisturbed royal fortune, Raja Lakshmi, was resorted to by all Varnas and chosen as their lord to protect them. He was the one who made and is true to the vow to the latest breath of his life to abstain from slaying men except in battle. So the element of non-violence also comes in. And we are told that he showed compassion, karunya. There is a strong Brahminical element in the presentation of the king as benevolent towards cows and Brahmins and as a protector of the normative Brahminical Varna order. Perhaps the most striking aspect of the inscription is that in highlighting his great achievement of providing water to his subjects by repairing a water reservoir, the inscription displays a remarkable depth of historical memory, about 4.5 centuries, anchoring the greatness of the Shaka, this Shaka ruler, with the Maurya Empire, because it talks about the building, the construction of the reservoir under Chandragupta, the completion of the reservoir under Ashok, and then along comes Rudradaman, and he rises to the occasion when there's a terrible storm and the reservoir is kind of close to destruction. What a remarkable inscription! It's a story of not just, of course, a great king, but also of Sudarshan Lake. So let me conclude. The evidence from Takshila and Sonk, these two sites that I detailed, suggest some specific material markers or changes in Indo-Scythian or Shaka levels. The frequency of the depiction of these so-called Scythian figures, men with pointed hats, whether Scythian or generic Central Asians, with a specific headgear and attire, suggests a recognition of these culturally distinct people. Their association with musical instruments and ritual tanks is extremely intriguing. Certain motifs in Indian art that became widespread during this period can perhaps be connected to the tastes and traditions of Indo-Scythian elites and patrons. Indo-Scythian rulers played an important role, I argue, in the evolution of ancient Indian royal ideology and religious policy. Gold-laden Scythian kurgans of the Tilya type have unfortunately not so far been found in India. Perhaps they will one day, perhaps they have disappeared due to grave robbing, or perhaps the Indo-Scythians or Shakas rapidly abandoned their age-old funerary practices when they established themselves in the Indian subcontinent. The fact that the specter of the Shakas loomed large for so many centuries in the Brahminical texts suggests that what I call the Shaka shock, sounds nice, that's right, to the Indian cultural fabric was not as superficial as it's often held to be by historians. The official Brahminical position for centuries on end remained that the Shakas were one among several inferior and disruptive militias, that is, barbarians. These negative portrayals persisted despite clear evidence of a relationship based on mutual benefit between the Indo-Scythian elites and Brahmins. The history of the Indo-Scythians, I'm concluding, or Shakas, throws important light on the interface between states and so-called barbarians and reveals the complex negotiations that came into play when barbarians became rulers. It also highlights the importance of nomads from Central Asia in the history of ancient India. And I'm sure that the new gallery that Mr. Mukherjee talked to us about at the beginning will give adequate space and recognition to the importance of these nomads. Thank you so much.